Welcome to our bonus podcast, and thank you for your support and friendship. Your support through the Pastor Paul support community enables me to provide over 10 hours of free content every week for those searching for emotional and spiritual well-being, as we're all doing that together in this community we're trying to build of the Pastor Paul community. Go to the website, pastor-paul.com. If you have any questions, interact on the chat board, talk about Rev Timoth Sylvia and what he had to share here. Would love to hear your thoughts. Why do Christians feel the need to control others through our religion? Hear what Rev Timoth has to say in this bonus episode of the Post-Evangelical Podcast. So tell me about your name, Timoth. Did your folks forget the Y on the end of it? What happened there?
There's a story to the name, and then there's just a story about my name, period. One is fun, the other is just silly. The joke usually when somebody asks is I just say that, either if I'm writing it somewhere, I say, my pen ran out of ink. I only got the Timoth, I couldn't get the Y in. Or that my parents couldn't afford the full name, one or the other. The reality is, it began as a nickname in high school. I had a friend, Jason, who started calling me Timoth. And for some reason, it took off. Everybody started using it, my family, my friends. And I eventually had it legally changed post 9/11 because the name I was booking travel with didn't match my passport any longer. And so I spent the $94 and had it legally changed, in part too, so that I can call you up on the phone, Paul, and be like, "Hey, Paul, it's Timoth." I don't have to give my full name. It's like Cher or Madonna or Prince. But the fun story with my name is that I was actually born Andrew Stephen. And before they filled out my birth certificate, my grandmother, God bless her, recognized that my initials were going to spell ass. So my parents quickly did a name change to Timothy, and then later on Timoth. So see, that's the fun story. That's it.
That's a good story. That's a good story.
Always thankful for grandma. So.
And so you have your husband is Peter. Is husband the right term?
Absolutely. Yeah, we got married 7 years ago today.
Oh, wow.
It's our anniversary.
Happy anniversary to you.
Thank you. We've been together for nearly 19 years and married for 7 of those.
Now, a lot of my queer friends have multiple anniversaries. We really got married then, but legally then. Do you guys have that?
We have the other anniversary that we celebrate is so this would be the 19-year anniversary, which is Halloween, which is the first day we met face to face. We actually met online, and we chatted online for 6 months or so, and we lived. We were both living in Maine at the time, although several hours away from each other, and he moved closer. And so on Halloween, we said, "Hey, let's get together and have dinner," because neither one of us wanted to deal with trick-or-treaters. Now we have 3 of our own trick-or-treaters. Yes. So Halloween night we met for dinner, and the rest is history, as they say. So
sorry, I hit the wrong thing on my screen there. Very cool. And 3 kids. You've adopted 3 children.
We have. We are foster adoptive parents. We've fostered 4 other children in addition to the 3 that we've adopted. So actually, we adopted our first son coming up on 7 years. So shortly after our wedding, we were able to adopt our oldest son, who's 15, and then 6 months later, we're introduced to a sibling set, our 2 younger boys, and they were with us for a year before we were able to adopt them. So,
very cool, and amazing that we make such quibbles about family and what is family and all these things, and here you guys are taking care of 7 children by my quick math. For whatever reason, weren't able to be cared for by their own parents.
Right. And at one point, so we had our 3 boys, and then we were fostering a sibling set of 3 others. So we had 6 kids at one time, ages 10, 9, 7, 5, 3, and 2, all living with various special needs. 5 boys, 1 girl. The girl was severely autistic, nonverbal, and had us wrapped around her little finger. And we luckily have great stories in regard to our fostering, because the children that we have fostered have been returned to their biological families, and we're still in contact with them, with the parents, and are able to see that the kids are safe, they're doing well. We were able to help put together some great resources for them in advance of them going back to their biological families that have carried on with them. Because unfortunately, we could do a whole conversation on the brokenness of the foster system. It was easier for us as foster parents to get some of the resources in place than it would have been for the biological family. So we fought hard to get those before we were able to return the kids. So been good experiences. Not everybody has that. So we're very thankful for that. So.
And you're active in that foster care role. Is that sort of a missional thing for you and your husband?
So it really has become that. We I think early on we recognized we'd heard that the system was broken, like every system, and getting involved in it, we really saw how broken it was, and how traumatizing it was for children who are already being traumatized when they're placed in the system, and have become huge advocates for the kids and for families. And unfortunately, because of the way that it often works out when you're advocating for someone and speaking truth to power, we're no longer foster parents at this point.
My goodness.
Our license was put in jeopardy at one point, although we were still able to be licensed, but miraculously never got any phone calls to foster any children again. So now that we're not foster, we can speak out even louder about just the honest corruption in the system, at least in our state. And from what I hear from others, it's not uncommon, sadly. So
it just drives me crazy. It goes into that space of, what is pro-life, right? We hear pro-life, and it seems to me like Christians are pro-human as long as they're not born. But once they're born, you're on your own.
Or some would say pro-birth. So we'll support that until birth happens, and then all of these unfortunate circumstances that happened, to human beings, that I actually think, for those of us who claim to follow Jesus, we've got some pretty good models of how we are actually supposed to be engaging with folks who are birthed. And we seem to be failing in many ways. So,
well, it goes back to like what you were talking about. Where does this need to have this fight? I mean, a big part of evangelical support of Donald Trump is abortion, and where did this fight come from? It's one of the things I had to confront in myself, because I was never big on the abortion battle, and I was kind of like asking God, why doesn't this animate me like so many others? And I began to search the Bible, which is a dangerous thing. And I began to find, well, the Bible's pretty agnostic on abortion. It really is not a massive issue. And so I began to talk to our people at our church, like, how do we become anti-unwanted pregnancy, not anti-abortion, or pro-pregnant woman rather than anti-abortion? And it seems to me if we would sort of take that viewpoint, we could actually make a difference on some of these things.
Yeah. Well, and I think that goes back to that question of, whose need does it meet, for us to be so invested in an aspect of how someone else is living their life, and the reality is that the loudest voice in opposition of abortion is a Christian voice. Yes. So, and now it's, and the way it's working its way into legislation, whose need is that meeting? what is the, I struggle to understand what it is for particular individuals who are claiming, again, to be followers of Christ, who are then dictating the way that people need to live their life. I can't wrap my mind around it.
And I think it's a really scary season because Christians are feeling their power. Mm-hmm. And man, we're gonna go after the trans kids. We're gonna go after the abortion provider, the healthcare provider in the clinic. I just think it's a scary time and I think if one thing you see in the Bible is when we get to these spaces, that's when civilizations start to get overturned and decline a little bit. Yeah. So it is kind of a scary time with all of this.
Yeah, because I think just I don't know if it was today or the last couple of days, the legislation that was passed in Arkansas, which shifted it from no abortions after 20 weeks of the pregnancy back to 15 days, or 20 days, now 15. And the fact that the two clinics in the state, because of everything else that was written into the legislation, those clinics can't abide by the law. And so now they have to shut down, and I'm sure that's seen as a huge victory, and will have a ripple effect across the nation. Just like we're seeing with the anti-trans legislation, the anti-LGBTQ legislation here in my own state. We have legislation proposed that is the fairness in women's sports legislation, which is the anti-trans. We have a curriculum legislation that got introduced that is anti-trans, anti-queer, it's completely white supremacist, trying to ban particular curriculums, trying to ban the use of words like supremacy and white guilt and those sort of things. And there's over 250 pieces of legislation introduced across the United States right now that are anti-queer.
Wow. And you're in the liberal Northeast up there.
I know. I honestly, Paul, I went down a rabbit hole thanks to TikTok and was researching where a lot of these bills were coming from. And all the way down to the fact that it's like Heritage Foundation and several other conservative evangelical groups that are creating the boilerplates for these bills and disseminating them across the nation. And so I went onto the map to see what some of these 250 different pieces of legislation were, and the curse of living in the smallest state in the nation is that when you look at the entire map and all the states that are lit up, because they have proposed legislation, you look over in New England and it's like, well, there's nothing in Massachusetts, there's nothing in Connecticut. We're just this tiny thing in between. So I had to enlarge the map to see that, oh, wait, we're actually lit up. Hold on. We have two bills being presented that we've been paid attention to. But yeah, I mean, it's just, it's heartbreaking to see. Because even as we've named in this state, we just had a hearing on one of the bills last week, and it's never going to pass in Rhode Island. That's a reality. However, the damage has already been done to the queer community just in its presentation. So we're trying to figure out, like, how do we then, as a faith community, somehow reach out to and support members of the queer community who are, hearing from our legislators that they're not worthy, that they're unlovable, that they're an abomination. I mean, that's the unfortunate thing, because again, I don't know how many of the 250 pieces that are introduced across the nation are actually going to make it beyond like a committee. But the introduction of them is extremely harmful and traumatizing.
I was going to follow up with a question about that, and I actually stitched a video, or whatever I did. I ran somebody else's video of the governor of Utah vetoing anti-trans sports, an anti-trans sports bill, and his speech to that brought tears to my eyes. Yeah. To say I want these kids to live. And we're only talking about 4 kids in the entire state of Utah.
Yep.
And I want them to live and not unalive themselves, as we would say in TikTok world, and to know they have a place in our state. And this is the freaking Republican governor of Utah. And of course, his veto was overridden anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what are we saying to our queer communities and our trans community, which I don't know if I separate those out necessarily, but what is this saying that this is so widespread across our country right now?
Mm-hmm. And that's an excellent example too, because of that governor did such a great job of breaking down all of the numbers of, the number of student athletes, the number of them that are transgender, 3 male, 1 female, I believe. And that bill was directed at that female ultimately,
right?
One
female,
yeah,
1 girl.
So, I mean, it's just, and I think this is the sickening piece for me is that, that when that veto was overridden, like, again, that's seen as a success, that's seen as a win, and what are they winning? What is the purpose? And definitely sending a clear message to that 1 female student, those 3 male students, not only in Utah, but then spread that out across the nation, because we're all watching, right?
Right.
Yeah, that where are these individuals going to be able to go to be accepted, to be safe? Yeah, I just, and
there's a lot of good people, and I mean that sincerely, that I talk to, who are like, yeah, but it's not fair for somebody who's biologically gone through male puberty to compete against a woman. And I think it's an interesting, I think there are biological and scientific things that can be spoken into all of that. But I just sort of go to, first off, on the big macro level, we're talking about this Ivy League swimmer. We're talking about an Ivy League biologically born male, now female swimmer. And I can't help myself. Maybe I just go, oh yeah, what advantages do the women that she's competing against have in their life? How many of them grew up in the country club world with parents that could afford to get them to the Olympic swimming pool with the best coach, to travel, to do the things they needed to do to become a collegiate level women's swimmer?
Mm-hmm.
I think they probably had some advantages to get there to begin with. And yes, if that was my daughter and she came in 5th instead of 4th, maybe I'd be disappointed. If she lost her scholarship to a trans, it would hurt. But what is the return on investment as a culture of affirming just a whole group of people who receive so little affirmation in our culture? Isn't it worth it?
And part of the argument in this particular subject is, that female trans athletes are going to dominate their sports. There have been trans athletes already in sports that aren't dominating, and even this particular swimmer, just look at, how did they do in the particular meets that they're not dominating. Right. It just happens to be that this one win set everybody off. And the other piece that I've seen that folks are lifting up is, so if we want to talk about biological advantages, let's look at Michael Phelps. Who has significant biological advantages, including apparently his ankle structure that he's born with, that is a benefit to his swimming. And why aren't we talking about that? Well, we're not, because he's not a transgender athlete.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, again, it's got to be rooted in some sort of fear, and I don't believe that it's a fear of, losing a meet, or, fear of an athlete doing better than, you or your child, or it's a fear of something that is just not a part of your narrative. It's not a part of what you've grown up knowing. It's something new that you just don't know what to do with.
Yeah.
And the narrative around it is perpetuating that fear, in such a way of like, all the bathroom bills, right? That's all fear-based, right?
And the thing that makes me so angry around it is probably most of those people applauding that Utah veto override were anti-Title IX people to begin with. They were not supporters of women's sports when we legally had to create space for women to be able to compete at a college level through Title IX. I heard it all the time. They're taking opportunity from those boys, and girls don't play sports as much as boys do. And it's like, yes, they don't, because they're not given the money and the space and the opportunity and the locker rooms and all of those things. And so this is not about opportunity for women that we're fighting over here.
No.
You're exactly right. It is a fear of somebody who looks different than me.
Yeah. The other unfortunate piece to consider in all of this is, so not only the message that's being sent across the nation to all of our transgender children and youth, for those particular families, who are living in the midst of this fear, and celebrating these sort of successes, God forbid they have children who are transgender, who haven't yet come out, and clearly not safe environments, where, there may be other aspects of, I think we mentioned in our first conversation that, if the more representation, the more you're interacting with folks who are queer, the more you're becoming accustomed to it. And many folks just aren't connected yet with folks who are transgender as much. That if a parent has a child who comes out as gay or lesbian or bisexual, there are those experiences where, because now it's their child, some of the mindset shifts. I don't see that happening with a lot of these families if there are transgender children. And I think part of that goes back to what I was saying before. There's much more representation now around gay, lesbian, bisexual individuals, and not as much around the transgender community. Progress shows us that we will get to a place, where there is. However, who's the next community that's then going to be the target at that point?
Right.
Because there's always going to be another target.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, if you were a trans kid of one of those adamant anti-trans athletes, are you going to come out or are you going to try to stuff it as long as you can?
Yep.
And then take the psychological burden of that up to making a life decision that is irreversible. And, and it makes me shiver that if there is a judgment thrown somewhere out there in the ethos of what God will say about people that hold to that belief and do that to people around them.
Mm-hmm. And this is why I think it's even more important for folks who would take on the title of ally, to strengthen our voices, to find ways to broadcast a message of acceptance and affirmation as far and as wide as possible. I see some really incredible groups that form through social media. Sort of the the stand-in family. So folks across the nation who are willing to advocate on behalf of queer youth whose families may not be accepting or may actually be harmful. I think this is definitely a time where we need to make sure that our voices are heard, that we are present in as many ways as possible, visible in as many ways as possible, so that these young people can look beyond their current setting and say, okay, wait, no, there are people out there that are saying a very different message. And it's a message of love. It's a message of acceptance. It's a message of affirmation. And they need to hear that.
So good. And let's finish with this. So TikTok, why are you on TikTok? How did you get started doing TikTok, and what's your hope and mission on there?
I started dabbling with TikTok when the previous occupant of the White House was trying to get it banned. So I thought this might be something I like. And so I did like a lot of folks did during the COVID pandemic, and spent a lot of time just scrolling through TikTok, laughing my ass off because it was fun and funny. And then a year ago in September, I did my first video. A lot of my first videos were just using some of the either trending sounds or just, something goofy. I had no particular direction for my content other than just to have fun. And what I started to recognize or started to experience were folks who were connecting with me once they realized that I was an openly queer religious person. And a lot of my following, was representing that. And so my content shifted to present more of that sort of affirmation message. The lives that I do, a lot of them are what we call brave space, which is cultivating brave space for members of the trans or queer community who've been hurt by the church in the past. I've amassed a following, which is mind-boggling.
103K. I'm looking at it right now.
And a good number of them. I have a lot of atheists that follow me and engage with me. I have a lot of folks who have left church, whatever that experience would have been, yet still have a yearning for something. I lovingly have been sort of accepted into the deconstruction experience. One of the fellow content creators made a video some time ago sort of highlighting a lot of the deconstruction TikTok creators, and did it in such a way where each creator was given a personality, like a high school personality. I was included in that as the only one who really isn't deconstructing. And I was the janitor that it's okay to cuss in front of. That was my sort of character. But I see it's very clear that there are people in need of this loving message of, you are accepted fully and wholly for who you are and who you understand God created you to be. And I think its representation is so important, so to just be authentically me, this flawed human being who happens to have been born gay and is living life fully, I think is an important thing to be, and an important presence to be able to provide for folks. And I'm guessing that that's a big part of the connections that I'm making with folks there. So
yeah, and I think you're just cool too. So I think people are
finally midlife, I get to be one of the cool kids.
That's awesome. So he's at Rev Timoth on TikTok. Check him out. Sylvia, it was a pleasure to get to hang out with you today.
Oh, Paul, this was awesome. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Keep doing what you're doing, and to the support community, thank you guys, and we'll talk to you again soon.